der Weltbevölkerung.
We, after all, represent about two-thirds of the global population, 4/5 of global GDP, and 3/4 of global trade. So everyone who's not at the table today is absolutely justified in expecting us to do a good job.
The G20 wraps up its annual summit after tackling an ambitious agenda addressing climate change, global trade and economic development. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The G20 summit comes to a close in Hamburg, Germany, and despite differences, the 20 leaders found consensus on major areas of trade and economic growth. We begin with this report from CGTN's Natalie, Carney.
Well, the final communique delivered at this year's G20 here in Hamburg, Germany, had almost everyone on board in all areas. Almost everyone. In the area of climate change, 19 of the 20 G20 countries reaffirmed their commitment to the quote-unquote irreversible Paris Accord. Angela Merkel said it had been very difficult to get a consensus, and in the end, they ended up breaking with tradition to add a separate paragraph to the communique to include the Trump administration's withdrawal from the Paris climate change deal. Trump did, however, manage to reach an agreement with the other 19 countries in the area of trade. However, those discussions, too, were said to be very contentious and very tense. While most of the G20 countries were talking about free trade, Trump was talking about fair trade, and in particular, the Trump administration's desire to impose a rather heavy tax on steel imports, which will likely affect the European Union and China, who export more than 24% of the world's steel exports. Trump certainly did seem to be holding true to his election promise to put America first, yet German Chancellor Angela Merkel did say that this posed a lot of problems in trying to meet a consensus in a wide variety of areas. The group also spoke about terrorism, as well as the migration issue and cybercrime. And as they are in every G20, bilateral meetings also highlighted this year, particularly the highly anticipated meeting between the U.S. President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin. Both sides have deeply disagreed on a number of policy issues leading up to this first face-to-face between the two leaders. But according to the Secretary of State for the U.S., Rex Tillerson, it was a very constructive conversation. Most significant was the agreement made between U.S. and Russian officials to implement a ceasefire in southwestern Syria that went into effect this weekend. This is quite a significant development, being that both parties have been supporting opposite ends of the Syrian conflict since the war began over 6 years ago. Trump also met with the Chinese President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of this year's G20. They were hoping to revamp relations following some tense conversations. Trump used the opportunity to urge Beijing to use its influence on the DPRK to stop their nuclearization program. Coming out of talks, analysts say there was little sign of progress. The two leaders were also said to have discussed trade issues. There was no illusion that this summit was easy. Controversial issues with some new players. Angela Merkel herself saying that the discussions were quote-unquote very difficult. Now, with what I'm sure will be a sigh of relief, Germany passes the G20 presidency off to Argentina, who will host world leaders in their capital, Buenos Aires, next year. This will be the first time that the G20 summit is held in South America. Natalie Carney for CGTN in Hamburg, Germany.